What podcast should you be listening to if you're a health and safety professional? I'm going to tell you in this video. Let's go.
The problem in safety isn't deviation, it's complexity.
Health and safety has gone mad.
Health and safety is trying to unpick having gone mad in the past.
There's no one solution and one problem. The problem is that we are looking for one solution.
Does the structure of the team allow them to flourish?
Feel safe enough to be uncomfortable.
The environment defines our behaviours.
People aren't the problem, they're the solution.
Rebranding safety, crushing the stereotype. Brought to you by Risk Fluent. Okay, category number one is kind of like general health and safety podcasts. They are podcasts that are very similar to Rebranding Safety. So they're much more interview based and they vary in long form or short form. Number one, The Hop Nerd by Samuel Goodman. Samuel Goodman, the Hop Nerd himself, is just an all-round awesome guy. The easiest way to describe the Hop Nerd is Rebranding Safety, the American version. We both agree on that. That's not just me being arrogant. The good thing about Sam is he actually knows what he's talking about when it comes to this new view and hop stuff. He's a betterment evangelist, as he calls himself. He's all about those conversations that help us become better. He's doing some amazing work on diversity now as well, so go check out that as well. Most of Sam's stuff is in long form. It's about an hour long per podcast, and most of his podcasts go over 2 parts because he's very much like me, is that he can talk and he just loves talking to people that he can talk to, essentially. So very much like me, except Sam quite cleverly splits it over 2 episodes if it goes over a certain amount of time. So Sam's podcast is really, really good. Sam's a really good conversationalist, and you know, he is literally me in America, like, and I am him in England. Like, he's very, very similar to me. So if you like Rebranding Safety, you will love the Hop Nerd. Number 2, Colin Nottage, the Interest in Health and Safety podcast. The Interest in Health and Safety podcast is very similar to Rebranding Safety as well. He's a direct competition. To be honest, Colin should quit because as a health and safety professional and as a health and safety podcaster, his talents are wasted. Colin has the voice of an angel and he should be on the Calm apps or the Headspace apps, not doing health and safety. His voice is like gold as it comes out. It's so relaxing. That's probably not what you're going to listen to his podcast though. The Interest in Safety podcast is great. It is a mixture of long form and short form. You've got long form interviews where he'll have a guest on, and he's a really good interviewer, Colin is. He kind of explores it from curiosity. He's very similar to myself in that we're on this kind of learning journey through our podcasting, and he's curious to learn more and more from his guests. So he's a really, really good interviewer. He also does some short form episodes where he talks about a specific subject. He'll give you like 5 tips for working at height or something like that, which is really handy for new, fresh professionals and people that are business owners or business managers or business leaders or something like that. So go check out the Interest in Safety podcast. Okay, Safety FM with Jay Allen. Now, Safety FM can be a little bit confusing. Safety FM is much more of a wider bracket. Jay Allen's got himself a little collection of podcasts. So, for example, the Hop Nerd, which I spoke about, is kind of supported and run with the Safety FM kind of bracket. But Safety FM itself is a podcast as well, run by Jay Allen, who's, to be honest, could have gone in the other section of Original Gangsters, but I put him in here because he's very similar. He will interview anybody, he interviews loads of different people, and the good thing about Jay is the quality of his work is beautiful. He's flawless. He even runs separate shows, like the R-rated show, for example. And it's like a radio station more than it is a podcast. It's very interesting how he set it up. He's a really, really good interviewer. He doesn't really do any prep before he does prep, but he doesn't do any like pre-questions or anything like that. He'll just research you if you're going to be interviewed there, and then boom, he interviews you. And he's really good at just kind of flowing the conversation, making it really natural. You feel like a fly on the wall as part of these conversations. So go check out Jay Allen, the Safety FM. Again, that's a mixture of long form and short form. Most of the interviews are anything like 30 to 40 minutes. The Safety Justice League. These guys absolutely, I think, love their sci-fi and bits and bobs like that. Obviously, the Safety Justice League, all their merch is pretty cool as well. Go check these guys out because they've got something unique. They're a team of people made up of Nathan, Abby, Jason and Jason. And they kind of mix it up. So you'll have anything like a short episode with like Jason talking about safety snake bites, as he calls them. Or you'll have like a tag team interview where Abby Abby and Nathan are both together interviewing someone, or it's just a one-to-one interview where Jason's sitting down with somebody and just interviewing them, having a conversation. They've some great guests on as well. Like they've had a young lady who's really prominent on TikTok and is actually really like leading the way. Nothing to do about safety, her channel, but it's using the kind of power of TikTok, and Jason turns that into how can we use the power of TikTok in health and safety. So the Safety Justice League have kind of nailed on something really unique here. Because of the team, you get this real natural kind of diversity within the conversations. One week it's hosted by Abby, the next week it's hosted by Nathan, and they're all pretty prominent on social media as well, so go check them out. That's the Safety Justice League. Okay, section 2, the old timers, the original gangsters. And when I say old timers, I mean that as a compliment. I'm trying to think of another phrase, but we'll go with compliment. It is a compliment. These are the podcasts that have kind of set the foundations. They led the way and still are leading the way. So the first and most obvious one is the Pre-Accident Investigation podcast with Todd Conklin. What more can I say about this podcast? It's a podcast giving you his wisdom, and he much prefers short form. So a lot of his episodes are 1 to 2 minutes, and then some of them are, where they're interviews, he'll pick like 30 or 40 minutes tops. Some of them go a bit long form, but mostly they are no more than 40 minutes, and in most cases they're just little minutes here and there. So personally, I'm not a massive fan of short form. I like to get really engrossed in a podcast. But a lot of the interviews he had are flawless. And obviously, you know, when you get someone like, say for example, Sydney Decker on, you've got Todd Conklin and Sydney Decker just chatting away. You know, it's just gold dust for any kind of safety professional. So great podcast, definitely original gangster. This has been going for years and years and years and years. So if you're looking for a podcast to really delve in deep with and kind of binge for a long time, that is the one for you. So go check out Todd Conklin. Okay, the other original gangster of podcasts is a very popular podcast called Disastercast, which actually doesn't really run anymore because he's moved on to something else. However, this was a podcast run by Drew Ray, and it essentially is, he tells you really scary stories so that you don't have to live through them again, so to help you kind of stop them again. Very similar to another podcast I'm going to talk about in a minute, but Drew Ray really takes the kind of storytelling power and does it really well. He's a researcher, essentially works in the same university lab as Sydney Decker. He talks about disasters that have happened over the years, recent or old. He analyses them, he tells the story, and we learn lessons from that. Essentially, that is what Disastercast is. It's extremely popular. It's got a massive following. So definitely go check that out. There is one catch, however, with Disastercast. You cannot get it on all platforms. So I'll link Disastercast's website below, and when you go on that website, you see which platforms they're on. So for example, I don't think it's on Spotify, but you can get it on Google Podcasts. I think you can get it on Podbean or something like that as well. So I'll link the website below, but you'll have to go in there and check which platforms, because you might need to download one, because I don't think it's on the most popular ones. The only catch with that, but a very, very good podcast nonetheless. Okay, second to last, before we get into my favourite podcast or my most listened podcast, the second to last section, which is the Outside the Box podcast. These are probably two of the ones I listen to the most, and they're not health and safety podcasts, but they are podcasts that can help us as health and safety professionals. So the first one is an amazing podcast, and to be honest, this was very close to being the first place, the one that I listen to the most. But this one is Cautionary Tales by Tim Harford. This basically is Disastercast, but with a much bigger budget. Tim Harford is a undercover economist, as he calls himself, and it's not health and safety focused podcast, whereas Drew Ray's Disastercast kind of is. You know, Drew Ray is in the safety industry or profession, whereas Tim Harford is an economist essentially. But he's talking about disasters, or he's talking about events that have happened. So for example, with one of them, he talks about that time that they gave the wrong BAFTA award to the wrong film, and etc., etc. And he talks about that and analyses it and looks at research and goes, here we can learn from this and blah, blah, blah. It's so well put together with music design and actors and actresses, and it's one you can get really immersed into. If you're sitting in a bath or sitting in a garden with a bottle of wine or something, you can really just put this on and just immerse yourself in it, because it's just like being told a story. It's really, really good. Like, please, everybody go check out Cautionary Tales by Tim Harford. The other one, which a shout out to Adam Johns, a friend of mine who put me on to this one. This is called the You're Not So Smart podcast. Essentially, this is taking the things that you're unaware of, but you're unaware that you're unaware of them, and telling you about them. It's much more kind of like psychology, sociology, economics, and they focus on sometimes some really in-depth, like technical subjects. So for example, like pluralistic ignorance, which if I told you about that now, you wouldn't know what I mean. But once you explain it, you're like, oh, I get that. So they'll start talking, and it has helped me in the short time I've listened to it, really analyse what I'm doing, really look at my work in a completely different way. It's like a psychology lesson or a sociology lesson for free. Go check it out, it's really, really good, it's really well put together. It's run by a gentleman called David McRaney. Go check it out, great podcast, like one of my favourites, definitely. Last but not least, my most listened to podcast, my favourite, and I've measured favourite on the one I listen to the most. And the reason I listen to it the most is because I get so much benefit out of this. It solves a problem for me. It is a podcast called the Safety of Work podcast, and it's by Drew Ray, the gentleman I just told you about who used to run Disastercast. He's partnered up with David Provan. And essentially what these two gentlemen do is they take a piece of research, they take a scholarly article, and they analyse it, they critique it, they review it, they take the lessons out of it, and they put it on the podcast for you all to listen to. So if you're anything like me and you've got the attention span of a gnat, you can't read anything longer than a small post on social media without printing it out because you just get distracted, then you probably really struggle with research articles and things like that. So this for me solved a massive problem in that there's so much in research articles that I want to learn, that I need to learn, that I need to know about, but I really struggle reading them. Like, they're just huge, and I never really like the format of it. You know what I'm like. If you've watched any of my book reviews, you know I like a story. So I really struggle with research articles. And what Drew Ray and David Provan have done with this is they've taken it, had it into like a conversation form, and it's just David and Drew talking back and forth about what they didn't like, what they learned, etc. from the research. And the other thing is what Drew Ray does really well, because he is a kind of professional researcher. I don't think that is the official title, but you know what I mean. He will explain to you as well, like what the research means and whether it was a good quality one that we can rely on, or whether it's not. And he does break down the kind of research technical jargon really well as well. So just flawless, definitely my most listened to podcast, because it is filled a massive void in my kind of learning life, so to speak. So go check that out. To summarise then, general kind of rebranding safety style podcast, you know, interviews and a medium to long form, The Hot Nerd, Samuel Goodman, Interest in Safety podcast, The Safety Justice League, Safety FM, which I need to correct myself, Jay Allen's show is called The Jay Allen Show on Safety FM, and Safety FM is a wider bracket, so apologies for that, but I'll link them all below. They're my kind of general health and safety conversation podcast ones. That makes sense? I really don't know what category to call them. Like general health and safety podcast? I feel like that's a bit like offensive. They're all so much better than just a general health and safety podcast. Anyway, Old Timers and Original Gangsters, Todd Conkling's podcast, a pre-accident investigation podcast, just an absolute classic, a must-have in most show lists on your Spotify or whatever you're listening on. Disastercast by Drew Ray, not making them anymore. You can only get them on limited platforms, but a very, very good podcast nonetheless. Go check that out. The Outside the Box podcast, You're Not So Smart podcast, great for learning psychological and sciencey stuff. Cautionary Tales by Tim Harford, which is just like, oh, so good. Go check that out. And then last but not least, my current most listened to podcast, the Safety of Work podcast. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. All the podcasts that we mentioned will be linked in the description below. If I've not mentioned a podcast which you listen to all the time, let us know in the comments below so that we can all share our wealth and knowledge. You know, just be like, oh, I haven't listened to this one. So there's so many. Honestly, there's so many now. When I started in England, there was like 3 or 4, and to be fair, in England we don't really have that many. There was 3 actually, and now there's 4, 5. I think there's 5, maybe 6 in the UK. But in America, it's boomed. There's loads now, so go check them out. They're just so good. So if you listen to any, put them in the comments below if we didn't mention it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please go and get yourself some merch, because all of the podcasters I've mentioned, most of us have merch, and we survive off of you buying merch. And you know, merch is just cool, man. So go check out our merch, www.rebrandingsafety.com. You can get yourself a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, you can get yourself a tote bag, a mug, everything you need to survive through the day, look cool as shit, and be like safe. Yeah, you know what I mean? If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. I'll catch you in the next video. Safe.